I'm standing in my kitchen at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, and I'm staring at a phone that shouldn't be ringing. More specifically, I'm staring at my husband Thomas's face on the screen. My husband who died 2 years ago. Let me explain. My cook, Elena, had just left 20 minutes earlier after preparing my dinner. I was settling in to eat when I heard the buzzing coming from the counter by the refrigerator. Elena's phone. She'd forgotten it. I walked over, intending to call her from my own phone to let her know I'd keep it safe until tomorrow morning. But then it started ringing in my hand. And the caller ID, I felt my knees go weak. It was Thomas's photo, the one from our anniversary cruise, where he's wearing that blue shirt I loved, smiling at the camera with the ocean behind him. The contact name read Tom C. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might faint. You need to understand. Thomas died 26 months ago. Sudden heart attack. He was healthy, active, only 70 years old. One morning, he just didn't wake up. The grief nearly destroyed me. So why was his photo calling my cook's phone? My hands were shaking, but something in me, maybe years of authenticating art forgeries, of trusting my instincts about what's real and what's false, made me swipe to answer. I didn't say hello. I just listened. Elena, you there? A man's voice, deep, slightly impatient. Elena, pick up. We need to talk about the next transfer. She's getting too comfortable, asking too many questions about her accounts. We might need to move faster than we planned. I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear. Call me back when you get this, and for God's sake, be more careful. We've come too far to mess this up now. The old lady trusts you completely. Don't give her a reason to change her mind. The call ended. The screen went dark, except for that photo of Thomas, still smiling at me, mocking me. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, my entire body trembling. My mind was racing through 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. Elena had a contact in her phone, saved as my husband's name, with his photo. Someone was talking about transfers, about my accounts, about me being too comfortable. Where are you watching this from? Have you ever had that moment when your entire reality shifts, when you suddenly realize that something you believed was safe, was sacred, might actually be poison? I walked to my kitchen table and sat down heavily. My dinner was getting cold, but I couldn't think about eating. All I could think about was that voice saying, "The old lady trusts you completely." And the worst part, the part that made me want to scream, was that I did trust her. Elena had been with me for 6 months. She'd been recommended by my neighbor. She was kind, attentive, respectful. She listened to my stories about Thomas, even cried with me on hard days. She cooked my favorite meals, managed my supplements, helped me organize the house. She had keys to my home, access to my mail. She knew where I kept important documents, and she had my dead husband's photo in her phone. Let me back up and tell you how this started. Because what I discovered over the next few weeks wasn't just about a cook stealing from a grieving widow. It was so much bigger, so much darker than I ever could have imagined. And it started 26 months ago, on the morning my husband stopped breathing. 26 months ago, my life was completely different. Thomas and I had been married for 42 years. We'd built a beautiful life together. I ran a small art gallery in downtown Hartford. He'd been a successful architect. We'd raised 2 children, both now living out of state with their own families. We were looking forward to traveling more, spending time with our grandchildren, enjoying what we'd worked so hard to build. Then one morning in March, I woke up to find Thomas cold beside me. I remember reaching over to touch his shoulder, the way I'd done thousands of mornings before. But his skin was wrong, too cold, too still. I shook him gently, then harder. "Thomas? Thomas, wake up." My voice sounded strange in the quiet bedroom, desperate and small. He didn't wake up. He never woke up again. The paramedics came. The doctors at the hospital said it was a massive heart attack. Sudden cardiac death, they called it. It happens sometimes, they said, even to seemingly healthy people. Thomas was 70 years old, in good health, active, but his heart had just stopped. The autopsy confirmed heart failure. The detective who came to the house, Detective Brooks, barely asked any questions. She looked around, asked if Thomas had been on any medications, if there'd been any arguments or unusual events. When I said no to everything, she nodded and wrote something on her clipboard. "Natural causes, Mrs. Carter. I'm very sorry for your loss. She had me sign some papers, gave me a business card I never used, and left within 20 minutes. Case closed. I was devastated. We'd had plans. We were supposed to grow old together, not have one of us just disappear overnight. The grief was overwhelming, like drowning in dark water with no surface in sight. For months, I could barely function. My daughter Sarah called every day from California, worried about me. My son James visited from Boston several times, but he had his own family, his own job. They couldn't stay. The house felt enormous and empty. It's a 4-bedroom Victorian we'd restored ourselves over the years. Thomas had designed the renovations, spent weekends stripping paint and refinishing floors. Every room reminded me of him. The study where he'd sketched plans late at night. The kitchen where we'd cooked together on Sunday mornings. The garden he'd planned with those ridiculous topiary ambitions he never quite achieved. I stopped cooking because I couldn't bear to prepare meals for one. I lost weight. I stopped going to the gallery. Eventually sold it to my assistant because I couldn't face going back. I existed more than lived. My neighbor, Dr. Samuel Chen, started checking on me regularly. He'd been Thomas's cardiologist, and I think he felt responsible somehow, even though there was nothing he could have done. He'd bring soup, sit with me while I cried, make sure I was taking my own medications. 6 months after Thomas died, Dr. Chen sat me down at my kitchen table. "Margaret, I'm worried about you. You're not eating properly. You've lost too much weight. You need structure, someone to help with daily tasks while you heal." "I'm fine, Samuel." "You're not fine, and that's okay, but you need support." He pulled out a business card. "This is a placement agency. They specialize in household help for people in your situation. Consider hiring someone to cook, help around the house, please." I took the card just to make him stop worrying. But later that night, sitting alone in the too-quiet house, I called the number. That's how Elena came into my life. She arrived for the interview on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I remember opening the door and seeing a woman in her early 40s, professional and neat in simple black pants and a blue sweater. She had warm brown eyes and an easy smile that didn't feel intrusive. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Elena Morales. Thank you for seeing me." We sat in the living room, and I explained what I needed. Someone to cook dinner 5 days a week, help with light cleaning, maybe run errands occasionally. Elena nodded, listening intently. She had excellent references from several families in the area. She specialized in European and Latin American cuisine, she said, and understood dietary needs for older adults. But what really sold me was how she listened when I talked about Thomas. Most people got uncomfortable when I mentioned him, changed the subject quickly, or gave me those pitying looks I'd grown to hate. But when I showed Elena his photo on the mantel, explained how much I missed him, she just nodded. "I understand loss," she said quietly. "My own father died when I was young. The grief never fully leaves, but it becomes bearable. Let me help make things a little easier for you, Mrs. Carter." I hired her on the spot. For the first few months, it seemed like the best decision I'd made since Thomas died. Elena arrived every afternoon at 4 o'clock, prepared beautiful meals, cleaned the kitchen, and left everything organized before departing around 7:30. She cooked things I actually wanted to eat. Nothing too heavy, lots of vegetables, occasionally something nostalgic like pot roast or chicken soup that reminded me of my mother. She was respectful of my space, but friendly enough that I didn't feel so crushingly lonely. We'd chat while she cooked, about her life, her family back in Ecuador, the neighborhood, current events. She seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, not just an employer. I started eating regularly again, started gaining back some of the weight I'd lost. Dr. Chen commented that I looked healthier, seemed more engaged with life. "Elena's been good for you," he said, and I agreed wholeheartedly. But looking back now, with the horror of that phone call fresh in my mind, I can see the red flags I ignored. I can see the moments that should have warned me something was wrong. There was the time about 3 months ago when Elena asked about my finances. We were discussing grocery budgets, and she said, "Mrs. Carter, forgive me if this is too personal, but do you have someone helping you manage your accounts? My last employer, she was alone like you, and she found it so helpful to have someone review her bills and statements. Sometimes errors happen, you know. I'd be happy to help organize things if you'd like." I'd declined politely, said my accountant handled everything. But she brought it up again a few weeks later. "I just worry about you being taken advantage of, Mrs. Carter. These companies, they see an elderly person and they think they can sneak in extra charges." At the time, I thought she was being protective. Now those questions felt predatory. Then there were the phone calls. Several times I'd walk into the kitchen and find Elena quickly ending a call, her expression momentarily tense before she'd smile at me. "Just my brother," she'd say. "He worries about me working such long hours." I thought it was sweet that she had protective family. There was also her curious interest in Thomas's death. Most people avoided the subject, but Elena asked questions. What was his heart condition exactly? Did he have symptoms before? What did the doctors say could have prevented it? At the time, I thought she was being thorough, understanding my medical history in case of emergencies. Now those questions felt sinister, like she was checking that her work had been successful. The most chilling thing happened just 3 weeks before I answered that phone call. I'd been going through some of Thomas's belongings, something I'd been putting off for months, and I found his old cell phone in his nightstand drawer. The battery was dead, but I charged it, thinking maybe there were photos or messages I'd want to save. Elena was in the kitchen when I brought the phone downstairs. She saw it in my hands, and her reaction was strange. Just for a moment, her face went pale, her eyes widened. "Is that Mr. Carter's phone?" she asked, her voice odd, higher than usual. "Yes, I'm going to go through it, see what's on here." "Oh, you should be careful with old phones," she said quickly, setting down the knife she'd been using. "Sometimes they have viruses, or they can corrupt if they've been sitting too long. Maybe you should have your granddaughter look at it first. You know how technical these things are. You could lose all his photos if you're not careful." It had seemed like helpful advice. Now it felt like she was trying to keep me away from something on that phone, something that would expose her. I'd set it aside, and honestly, in my grief fog, forgot about it. Until 3 weeks later, when I heard her phone ringing with my dead husband's photo on the screen. That night, the night of the phone call, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every interaction with Elena, every conversation, every moment that suddenly felt wrong. The way she'd asked about my safe combination in case of emergency. The time I'd found her in Thomas's old study, looking through papers, claiming she'd been searching for a recipe card I'd mentioned. The financial statements I'd noticed had been moved, just slightly, in my desk drawer. How could I have been so blind? So stupid? But I also knew I couldn't confront her yet. If there was really something criminal happening, and that phone call made it crystal clear there was, I needed evidence. I needed to understand the full scope before I acted. As the sun rose on Wednesday morning, I made a decision. I would investigate, carefully, quietly, intelligently. I would figure out exactly what Elena had done, what she was planning to do, and why my husband's photo was in her phone, connected to someone talking about transfers and moving faster. I was 68 years old, a widow, supposedly an old lady who trusted completely. But Elena had no idea who she was really dealing with. I'd spent 40 years in the art world, authenticating paintings, spotting forgeries that fooled experts. I knew how to look beneath surfaces. I knew how to identify deceptions, and I was about to become very good at investigating my own life. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Fear has a way of burning through grief fog like nothing else. I had exactly 11 hours before Elena would arrive for her shift at 4 o'clock. I needed to make them count. First, I called my granddaughter Amy. She's 24, works in graphic design, and knows everything about technology. She's also the only family member I felt I could trust completely. Sarah and James were too far away, too consumed with their own lives, and honestly, I wasn't ready to tell them their father might have been murdered. "Amy, honey, I need your help with something, and I need you not to tell your mother yet." There was a pause on the line. "Grandma, is everything okay? You sound different." "No, sweetheart. It's not okay, but I need to handle this carefully. Can you come over this morning? Bring your laptop. I'll be there in 45 minutes. She arrived in 37, her face creased with worry. I met her at the door, and she immediately hugged me. "Grandma, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I led her to the kitchen table and showed her Elena's phone. I'd kept it charged overnight, hidden in my bedroom. I told her about the call, about the man's voice, about the mention of transfers, and the old lady. Amy's expression shifted from concerned to furious in seconds. "Grandma, you need to call the police right now." "And tell them what? That my cook has a photo of my dead husband in her phone? That someone mentioned transfers in a vague voicemail? They'll think I'm a paranoid old woman. I need real evidence first." Amy sat back, her jaw tight. She understood. She'd seen how dismissive people could be of elderly concerns, how quickly they wrote things off as confusion or paranoia. "Okay, what do you want to do?" "I need you to help me get into that phone. I need to see what else is on there." For the next 3 hours, we went through Elena's phone. Amy bypassed the passcode. I won't tell you exactly how, but apparently it's not that difficult if you know what you're doing and have physical access to the device. What we found made my blood run cold. There were text messages between Elena and someone saved as V, her brother Vincent, based on the context. The messages went back 14 months, long before I'd even hired her. "Old lady posted about needing help on neighborhood board. Perfect target." That was Elena, from 8 months ago. "You sure about this one?" "Last time almost went sideways," Vincent's reply. "This one's clean. Husband dead 6 months, kids out of state, big house, definitely money, easy mark." I felt physically ill reading those words. Easy mark. That's what I was to her. A target, not a person. But Amy kept scrolling, her expression growing darker with each screen. The messages got worse. "Got the job. She's exactly as pathetic as expected. Still crying about dead hubby. Elena, 4 months ago. Good. Get access to documents, find account numbers. I'll work on the transfer protocols." Vincent's response. "She asked me about my family today. So trusting. Almost feel bad. Almost. Elena, 3 months ago." My hands were shaking. Amy reached across the table and gripped my hand tightly. "Grandma, this is criminal conspiracy. This is—" "Keep reading," I said quietly. The most damning messages were from just 2 weeks earlier. She found Tom's old phone, had to divert her from turning it on. That was close. "Elena, you need to be more careful. If she sees the call logs from before he died, we're done." "Vincent, relax. Phone's been sitting dead for 2 years. Even if she charges it, old lady probably can't figure out how to access anything." "Elena, you better hope not. Because if she does, she'll see every call I made to her house, pretending to be the insurance investigator, every call coordinating the timing." I stopped breathing. Amy looked at me with wide, horrified eyes. "Grandma, are they talking about—" "Keep reading," I whispered. Amy scrolled further back to messages from over 2 years ago, right around when Thomas died. Her hand flew to her mouth. "It's done. Administered the medication as instructed. Timed release, 6 to 8 hours. Will look exactly like cardiac arrest. Vincent, March 14th, 2 years ago. 3 days before Thomas died. You're sure it won't show up?" "Elena, positive. This stuff metabolizes completely. They'd have to be specifically looking for it, and nobody will be. Old guy, heart issues, textbook heart attack. I've done this before." "And the insurance?" Elena again. "Wife gets $750K life insurance, plus whatever else he has. We'll be patient, establish trust, then gradually drain it. 2 to 3 years from now, we disappear. She never knows what happened. Perfect crime." I ran to the bathroom and vomited. I heard Amy crying in the kitchen, but I couldn't stop being sick. They killed Thomas. They murdered my husband so they could rob his widow. When I came back, shaking and pale, Amy was standing with her phone in her hand. "I'm calling 911. "Wait." My voice was stronger than I felt. "Please, Amy, think about this. Grandma, this is evidence of murder. We need the police now. And what if they don't believe us? What if Elena deletes everything remotely? What if there's not enough to prosecute?" I sat down heavily. "I need more. I need to understand everything they've done, everything they're planning. I need this airtight." Amy was scared. I could see it in her eyes. But she also understood the reality. Evidence on a phone we'd accessed without authorization might not be admissible in court. We needed more. "Okay," she said finally, "but we're doing this smart and safe. What do you need?" We spent the next 2 hours developing a plan. Amy ordered tiny hidden cameras online. They'd arrive the next day, disguised as phone chargers and picture frames. She showed me how to set up a mirroring program that would let me monitor Elena's phone activity whenever she was in my house and connected to my Wi-Fi. She taught me how to photograph documents without leaving evidence, how to record conversations on my own phone. Grandma, you need to promise me something. If things feel dangerous at any point, you call the police immediately. No waiting, no more evidence gathering. Promise me. I promised. But honestly, I was beyond fear at that point. I was coldly, calculatingly angry. When Elena arrived at 4 o'clock that afternoon, I was waiting with her phone. Elena, thank goodness you're here. You left this last night. I was worried you'd need it. The relief that flooded her face was almost comical. Oh, Mrs. Carter, thank you so much. I've been panicking all day. She grabbed it quickly, her fingers moving across the screen immediately, checking it with barely concealed anxiety. Did anyone call? I'd hate for you to miss something important. No, I'm sure it's fine. Just, my brother worries. She smiled that warm, false smile I'd trusted for 6 months. Now, what should I make tonight? I was thinking of that lemon chicken you love? I smiled back, matching her false warmth. That sounds perfect, dear. While she cooked, I pretended to read in the living room. But through the phone Amy had helped me set up, I watched as Elena texted frantically. She gave the phone back. Didn't mention the call. Think we're okay. Vincent's response came quickly. You need to finish this. Get the account numbers, forge the POA documents, and let's move the first transfer. This week. She trusts me completely. It'll be easy. Over the next week, I became someone I'd never been before, a spy in my own home. The cameras arrived, and Amy helped me install them in the kitchen, living room, and my home office. I documented everything. I watched Elena photograph my financial documents when she thought I was napping. I recorded her phone conversations with Vincent, talking about the old lady's portfolio and how much longer they needed to maintain the charade. I found where she'd hidden a copy of my safe key. She'd had one made weeks ago, probably from a wax impression. I discovered forged power of attorney documents in her bag during one of her bathroom breaks, with my signature perfectly replicated. She'd been practicing on old shopping lists she'd stolen from my trash. Have you ever had to smile at someone, make conversation with them, knowing they murdered someone you loved? Knowing they were planning to kill you next? It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But the worst discovery came when I finally, with Amy's help, accessed Thomas's old phone, the one I'd found in his nightstand. The call logs showed exactly what Vincent's text had suggested. In the 3 weeks before Thomas died, someone had called our home number repeatedly, identifying themselves as an insurance investigator following up on a policy. I remembered those calls. Thomas had mentioned them, said they were annoying, asked why the insurance company needed to verify information they already had. He'd spent time on the phone with someone, answering questions about his health, his daily routine, his medications. But the calls had come from Vincent's number. He'd been establishing a pattern, a reason to be in contact, while he figured out Thomas's schedule, his habits, how to get close enough to administer the poison. One afternoon, while Elena was shopping for groceries, I went to see Dr. Chen. I needed to know if what I suspected was even possible. Samuel, I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, is there a medication that could cause sudden heart failure but leave minimal trace in an autopsy? Dr. Chen looked at me sharply over his glasses. Margaret, why are you asking this? I told him everything, showed him screenshots of the messages, watched his face cycle through shock, horror, and fury. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, There are medications, cardiac glycosides, certain potassium compounds, high doses of specific blood pressure medications. In concentrated forms, they can cause catastrophic heart failure. Most metabolize quickly, especially if the autopsy isn't specifically looking for them. He removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. Margaret, Thomas's autopsy showed heart failure, but they didn't do a comprehensive toxicology screen because there was no reason to. It was ruled natural causes, so if someone had given him something, it would look exactly like a heart attack, especially in a man his age. Dr. Chen's voice was heavy with guilt. I should have questioned it more. His heart was strong, Margaret. He had no significant blockages. I knew something felt wrong, but the autopsy said heart failure, so It's not your fault, Samuel. They were careful. Professional. They'd done this before. His head snapped up. Before? I told him about the messages, about Vincent saying, "I've done this before," about the references to "last time" and the old lady, like I was just one in a series. "Margaret, you need to go to the police. Now, this isn't just theft, it's serial murder." "I will," I said, "but not yet. I need one more thing. I need to catch them in the act. I need them to incriminate themselves so completely that there's no possibility of escape." Dr. Chen stared at me. "Margaret, that's dangerous." "Samuel, they killed my husband. They've been stealing from me for months. They called me a pathetic old lady and an easy mark. They're planning to kill me and disappear to Costa Rica with my money." I met his eyes. "I need them to pay for all of it, not just what we can prove today." He understood. I could see it in his face, the calculation, the anger, the desire for complete justice. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to help me set a trap, one they can't resist." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Thomas, about the morning I woke up to find him cold beside me. Had he known? In those final hours, had he felt sick, scared, confused? Had he called for me and I didn't hear? The grief that washed over me was different now. It wasn't the helpless, drowning grief of the past 2 years. It was sharp and focused and furious. Thomas hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered, and the people who killed him were living freely, planning their next victim, thinking they'd gotten away with it. They hadn't. They wouldn't. I was going to make absolutely certain of that. What would you do if you discovered the people who murdered your spouse had done it before? That you weren't the first easy mark, just the most recent? That's what Amy and I discovered when we started digging deeper into Elena's and Vincent's backgrounds. And trust me, what we found was so much worse than I'd imagined. Amy, brilliant girl that she is, ran background checks through databases I didn't even know existed. Vincent Morales worked in pharmaceutical sales, specifically cardiac medications. He had access to drugs that could absolutely cause sudden heart failure, and he'd been flagged twice by his employer for inventory discrepancies. Nothing prosecuted, just warnings. The missing drugs had been explained away as damaged samples or documentation errors. But the real horror came when Amy found the patterns. "Grandma, look at this." She'd been working on her laptop for hours, cross-referencing public records, obituaries, police reports. 5 years ago, there was an elderly woman in Greenwich, Patricia Ashford, 73 years old, died of sudden heart failure. 6 months later, her financial advisor noticed irregular withdrawals from her accounts, totaling nearly $400,000. The signature looked perfect, but Patricia had been dead for months. The investigation went nowhere because they couldn't prove who'd made the withdrawals. My stomach dropped. Elena? Patricia's household employment records show she hired Elena Morales as a private cook for 8 months before her death. Elena left the position 2 weeks after Patricia died, said she needed to return to Ecuador for family reasons. It got worse. 3 years ago in Westport, another widow, Helen Bernstein, 76, sudden cardiac death. Elena had been her housekeeper for 9 months, $275,000 missing after Helen's death, taken through a series of carefully timed transfers and forged checks. And again, 2 years before that, in New Haven. Same pattern. Elderly widow, Elena in the home, sudden death, missing money. "They've done this at least 3 times before," Amy said, her voice shaking. "Probably more we haven't found yet. Grandma, they're serial killers." I felt cold all over. Serial killers, not just thieves, not just opportunists. They had a system, a method. They'd perfected it. Why didn't anyone connect these cases? I asked. Different towns, different police departments. The deaths were all ruled natural causes. Sophisticated poisoning doesn't show up in standard autopsies. The theft was discovered too late, after Elena was long gone. Without a clear suspect or digital trail connecting them, the investigation stalled. Amy looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Grandma, if you hadn't found that phone, if you hadn't answered that call, you'd be next." I probably would have been. The forged power of attorney documents Elena had prepared were dated for next month. She was planning to have legal control over my accounts, able to make transfers and decisions on my behalf. Given how trusting I'd been, how isolated, I probably would have signed whatever she put in front of me. And once they drained my accounts, another tragic heart failure. Another grieving family discovering the money gone. Another perfect crime. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd gotten comfortable, careless. They'd assumed I was as helpless and clueless as their previous victims. They'd forgotten that underestimating someone is the easiest way to lose to them. Dr. Chen and I met at his house the next afternoon to devise the trap. We needed to catch them with irrefutable evidence, not just text messages that might be inadmissible, but active, in-progress criminal activity with witnesses and documentation. We need to give them an opportunity so perfect they can't resist, Dr. Chen said. Something that forces them to act immediately while we're watching. I have an idea, I said slowly, but it's risky. Tell me. I explained my plan. Dr. Chen's face went pale, then grim, then determined. Margaret, if this goes wrong, it won't. I need you to trust me, Samuel. I've thought this through. We also brought in a professional. Through Dr. Chen's recommendation, I contacted a private investigator named Jessica Reynolds, a former FBI analyst who specialized in financial crimes and elder fraud. I showed her everything. The texts, the forged documents, the pattern of previous victims, Amy's research. Jessica's reaction was immediate and professional. Mrs. Carter, this is prosecutable. We could go to the police right now and have them arrested. Could we guarantee convictions? She hesitated, and I could see her running through the legal calculations. The text messages are compelling, but they were obtained through unauthorized access to her phone. A good defense attorney could get them excluded. The forged documents haven't been used yet, so that's attempted fraud, not completed fraud. The previous victims, we'd need those police departments to reopen cold cases, which takes time and political will. And the murder, she shook her head. Thomas's body was cremated. No physical evidence to retest. It would be testimony about text messages that might not be admissible. So we need them caught in the act, red-handed, undeniable. Exactly. Jessica set up complete surveillance. Professional-grade audio and video recording equipment, all legally installed in my own home where I had every right to record. She also pulled Elena's and Vincent's financial records. They'd been sloppy, using the same LLC to launder money from previous victims, transferring funds through a series of accounts that looked complex but were actually easy to trace once you knew what to look for. They've stolen over $950,000 across 4 victims that we can document, Jessica said. And that's just what I've found so far. Nearly $1 million, 4 lives destroyed, 4 families left grieving and violated. Then came the dangerous part. We needed to give them an opportunity so perfect, so irresistible, they couldn't help but take it immediately, while we watched and recorded everything. I called a meeting with my accountant, making absolutely sure Elena was in the house, able to overhear. I left the study door slightly open and raised my voice just enough. Gerald, I've been thinking about that estate planning you mentioned. I want to consolidate my accounts, make everything simpler. Can you send me the transfer authorization forms? I'd like to move about $1.5 million into a more accessible account for living expenses and gifts to my grandchildren. I could practically feel Elena's attention lock onto my words from the kitchen where she was supposedly preparing vegetables. Yes, I know it's a lot to have liquid, but I'm 70 years old. I want to enjoy the money Thomas left me, help my family while I'm still here. Send the forms to my home address, please. That evening, I accidentally left the blank authorization forms on my desk in the study, the room where I knew Elena had already snooped multiple times. The forms required only my signature and account numbers to authorize massive transfers. The next afternoon, I told Elena I'd be going out for a few hours, an art gallery opening, something I hadn't attended since Thomas died. I'm finally feeling ready to socialize again, I told her, with what I hoped was a convincing, sad smile. You've been such a help, Elena. I don't know what I'd have done without you these past months. She smiled that warm, false smile I'd come to hate. You deserve to enjoy life, Mrs. Carter. Take your time. I'll have dinner ready when you return. I left, but I didn't go far, just to Dr. Chen's house next door, where Jessica had set up monitoring equipment in his spare bedroom. We watched on multiple laptop screens as Elena, the moment my car pulled away, went straight to the study. The cameras captured everything in crystal clear detail. her photographing the account numbers from statements in my desk, her practicing my signature on scratch paper, comparing it to my signature on the forms, adjusting her hand position to get it perfect, her calling Vincent on speakerphone. She just handed us everything. I can have the forms completed and submitted by tomorrow. Once the money moves to the accessible account, we trigger the contingency plan. Vincent's voice came through clearly. You mean? Yeah, same as the others. 1 week after the transfer clears, she has a tragic heart failure in her sleep. I'm the one who finds her, calls 911, play the devastated employee. By the time anyone notices the money's gone, we're in Costa Rica. Jessica's hand clenched into a fist. Dr. Chen's face had gone pale. I just watched, ice-cold rage keeping me perfectly calm and focused. But we needed more. We needed Vincent physically present, participating in the act of crime. We needed the poison. Elena called him back an hour later. Can you come tomorrow afternoon? Bring the thing. I want to have everything ready. Paperwork submitted, medication administered, all in one clean sequence. The thing meant the drug. The poison that had killed Thomas and at least 3 other innocent people. You sure about the timing? Vincent asked. She trusts me completely. I'm having her sign the forms tomorrow, telling her they're property insurance renewal documents. She'll sign anything I put in front of her. She's done it before. Then I'll put the medication in her evening tea. She goes to bed, doesn't wake up. Heart failure, totally expected for a woman her age with a history of grief and stress. Perfect. All right. I'll be there at 5. This is the last one, Elena. After this, we're out. After this, we're rich, Elena corrected. 1.5 million, plus whatever else we can grab before the family notices. We've earned this. Earned it. Like murder and theft were legitimate work. Jessica immediately called her contact at the Connecticut State Police. We have enough now for warrants, for arrests. But if we move too soon, they could claim the recorded conversations were taken out of context, that they were joking, that we need them with the poison, I said firmly. We need Vincent walking into my house with lethal drugs. We need them caught in the actual act of attempted murder. That's when there's no defense, no ambiguity. Jessica nodded slowly. Agreed. Tomorrow at 5 p.m., plainclothes officers will be staged around your property. The moment Vincent enters with the drugs, we move in. That night was the longest of my life. I had to act normal the next day, trusting, slightly befuddled, the pathetic old lady they thought I was. When Elena arrived at 4 o'clock, she was cheerful, relaxed, confident. She thought she was hours away from $1 million payday and freedom. Mrs. Carter, I have those insurance forms we discussed yesterday. If you could just sign here and here, I'll handle submitting them for you. Just routine renewal stuff. I looked at the papers. They were the transfer authorization forms, but Elena had added forged headers and language making them look like property insurance documents. Any normal person glancing quickly would sign without reading carefully. I picked up a pen, and my hand actually shook, not from fear, but from fury. Oh, thank you, dear. You're always so helpful with these complicated things. Mrs. Carter, wait. Dr. Chen's voice came from my front door. We'd coordinated his entrance perfectly. Sorry to interrupt, but I need to borrow Margaret for a moment. Medical question about the community health program. Elena's smile tightened, and I saw a flash of frustration in her eyes. Of course, Dr. Chen. I'll just get started on dinner. I left the forms unsigned and went with Dr. Chen to his house. Jessica and 2 plainclothes officers were waiting in his living room, watching the monitor feeds. She almost had you sign, Dr. Chen said quietly. I know, but I needed her to think I would. Is everything ready? Officers are positioned outside. Vincent's car was spotted 2 blocks away. He's coming. At 5:03 p.m., Vincent Morales walked up to my front door. The cameras caught him clearly. A tall man in his mid-40s, unremarkable in khakis and a polo shirt, carrying a small black pharmaceutical case. Elena opened the door, and they hugged. Their conversation was captured in perfect audio clarity. You have the signed forms? Not yet, the neighbor interrupted, but she'll sign them tonight, I'm absolutely certain. Let me see the medication. Vincent opened the case. Inside were 3 vials of clear liquid and several syringes. This is the last batch I could access without raising red flags. Enough for 1 dose, same formulation as before. Put it in any liquid, tea, juice, water, completely tasteless. She'll go to sleep and never wake up. How long? 4 to 6 hours. Cardiac arrest, massive and sudden. No way to reverse it even if someone tried. Same as we did with Tom. Perfect. By this time next week, we'll be on a beach in Costa Rica, and she'll be a tragic obituary. And that's when the Connecticut State Police came through both my front and back doors simultaneously. State Police! Hands up! Don't move! Elena's face went from triumphant confidence to shock to absolute terror in seconds. Vincent tried to run through the kitchen but was tackled by 2 officers before he made it 3 steps. The pharmaceutical case was secured immediately as evidence. I walked through my front door, past the uniformed officers, and looked Elena directly in the eyes. Her mouth opened and closed. You were supposed to be at Dr. Chen's. You were supposed to. I was supposed to be dead, I said quietly. Like Thomas, like Patricia Ashford, like Helen Bernstein, like all the other people you murdered for money. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, but her eyes were wild with panic. Yes, you do, and so do the police, and so does the prosecutor who's been waiting for this moment. I stepped closer. You made one critical mistake, Elena. What? Her voice was barely a whisper. You forgot your phone that night, and when I answered it, when I heard Vincent talking about the old lady and transfers and moving faster, I stopped being your victim. I became the person who would make absolutely certain you paid for murdering my husband. The officer reading her rights led her away in handcuffs. Vincent was already in a police car, shouting about lawyers and illegal entrapment. Jessica was documenting everything with her camera, ensuring the chain of evidence was perfect. Dr. Chen put his hand on my shoulder. You did it, Margaret. We did it, I corrected. All of us. But as I watched the police cars drive away with Thomas's killers inside, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted, hollowed out, and desperately sad that any of this had been necessary. Justice wasn't the same as having Thomas back. It never would be, but it was something. And after 26 months of grief and 6 months of lies, something felt like enough. You might think that watching 2 people get arrested for planning to murder you would feel like victory, like justice, like the end of the story. It wasn't. It was just the beginning of a different kind of nightmare. Elena and Vincent were taken into custody that evening. The pharmaceutical case contained 3 vials of digoxin, a cardiac glycoside medication in massive lethal concentrations. Vincent had manufactured them from legitimate pharmaceutical samples, concentrating the drug to levels that would cause instant, catastrophic heart failure. The police also seized Elena's phone, her forged documents, her computer with detailed financial information about me, and at least 6 other potential victims she'd been researching. Within 48 hours, the Connecticut State Police had reopened investigations into Patricia Ashford's, Helen Bernstein's, and 2 other elderly victims' deaths. Exhumations were ordered for those who'd been buried. Forensic accountants traced the money trail through the LLC and multiple shell accounts. The prosecutor assigned to the case, a sharp woman named Catherine Reeves, called me personally. Mrs. Carter, this is one of the most clear-cut serial murder cases I've ever seen. We have them dead to rights. But clear-cut doesn't mean easy. The preliminary hearing started 3 weeks later. I had to sit in a courtroom and watch Elena, who'd cooked my meals, listened to my grief, pretended to care about me, look at me with such pure hatred. The warmth, the kindness, all of it was gone. What remained was cold calculation and fury at being caught. Her attorney was an expensive defense lawyer named Marcus Brennan. Slicked back hair, $1,000 suit, the kind of man who made you feel dirty just being in the same room. He tried to paint me as a confused, paranoid widow who'd fabricated a conspiracy theory. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you've been suffering from severe depression since your husband's death? I've been grieving. That's not the same as being mentally incompetent. But depression can affect memory, judgment, perception of reality. Isn't that correct? My perception was accurate enough to catch your client planning to murder me. He didn't like that answer. Mrs. Carter, you hired my client based on a brief interview, gave her extensive access to your home and personal information, and then suddenly decided she was part of a murder conspiracy. Doesn't that seem like a rather dramatic shift? I looked him directly in the eyes. It would be if I hadn't heard her phone conversation about poisoning me, if I hadn't read the text messages about killing my husband, if police hadn't caught her brother with lethal drugs in my kitchen. But since all those things actually happened, my perception seems pretty accurate, don't you think? The courtroom murmured. Judge Blackwell, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, banged her gavel. Mr. Brennan, stick to relevant questions. But it continued. For weeks, through multiple hearings, the defense tried to discredit me, discredit the evidence, create reasonable doubt. They claimed the phone records could have been fabricated, that the financial forensics were speculative, that Vincent's medications were for legitimate pharmaceutical research. Vincent, meanwhile, turned on Elena almost immediately. His attorney, a younger man, desperate and sweating, argued that Vincent had been manipulated by his sister. Mr. Morales provided medication samples at his sister's request, believing they were for legitimate medical use. He had no knowledge of her intent to harm anyone. The text messages saying, "Same as before, and she'll never wake up," kind of destroyed that argument. But they tried anyway. What kept me going through all of it was anger, pure, righteous anger. These people had killed my husband, the man I'd loved for 42 years, who'd never hurt anyone, who'd died terrified and alone. They'd killed other innocent people. They'd planned to kill me and move on to their next victim. They didn't get to walk away from that. The turning point came when forensic investigators exhumed Patricia Ashford's body. She'd been buried, not cremated. And although 5 years had passed, toxicology was able to detect traces of the same cardiac glycoside medication in tissue samples. Combined with Elena's employment records, the financial theft pattern, and the text messages, prosecutors could now directly link Elena and Vincent to at least one provable murder. Helen Bernstein's family, devastated to learn their mother had been murdered, provided additional evidence. Emails from Elena expressing concern about Helen's declining health weeks before her death, establishing premeditation. Helen's attorney had kept meticulous records of the forged signatures that had drained her accounts, and handwriting analysis matched them to Elena's other forgeries. The evidence web tightened with every passing day. Vincent's pharmaceutical company provided records showing he'd accessed and signed out the specific cardiac medications found in Patricia's body and in the vials seized from my home. His supervisor testified that Vincent had repeatedly requested access to damaged sample batches that should have been destroyed. By the time the actual trial date was set, the prosecution had connected Elena and Vincent to 4 confirmed murders, 7 attempted thefts or frauds, and a conspiracy spanning at least 8 years. But there was still one thing I needed to do, one confrontation the legal system couldn't provide. I needed to look Elena in the eye and ask her why. Through Catherine Reeves, I arranged what's called a victim impact interview, a pre-sentencing process where victims can address the defendant. Elena's attorney advised her not to participate, but I think her arrogance couldn't resist. She wanted to face me, wanted to justify herself, wanted to prove she'd been smarter than everyone thought. We met in a conference room at the county jail on a gray Tuesday morning. Elena was in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller and harder than the warm woman who'd cooked in my kitchen. No handcuffs. This wasn't a legal deposition, just a supervised conversation. I sat down across from her. Catherine and a corrections officer sat nearby, observing. Elena's attorney watched like a hawk, ready to intervene. Why? I asked simply. Elena smiled, a bitter, sharp smile, nothing like the warmth she'd faked for months. Why do you think? Money. You people have so much of it, and you don't even appreciate it. You just sit in your big houses, crying about your dead husbands, wasting resources. So you decided you deserved it more. I worked for people like you for 15 years, scrubbing toilets, cooking meals, listening to boring stories, being treated like I was invisible. Then I realized these old widows, they're sitting on fortunes they can't even manage. They're lonely, trusting, easy to manipulate. Why shouldn't I take what they're too stupid to protect? The officer shifted uncomfortably. Catherine's jaw tightened, but I kept my voice calm. And the murders? Elena shrugged, like we were discussing the weather. Necessary. Can't steal from someone if they're alive checking their accounts. But dead? Especially if you've established yourself as the trusted helper? You can access everything before anyone even knows to look. By the time the family realizes money's missing, you're gone. Thomas, I said quietly. Did you ever actually meet him? Or did Vincent handle all of that? Vincent handled Tom, pretended to be an insurance investigator, called your house repeatedly, established a relationship, figured out his routine, his medications, his schedule. Then one night, Vincent came by while Tom was working late in his study, said he needed to verify some policy information. Maybe they shared a drink. She smiled coldly. Tom never knew what hit him. The medication worked perfectly. 6 hours later, heart failure in his sleep. You found him dead the next morning, and nobody questioned it. The casual way she described murdering my husband, like it was a business transaction, a task checked off a list, made me want to scream. But I kept my expression neutral. And the others? Patricia? Helen? Same. Lonely widows with more money than sense. Patricia actually thanked me the day before she died, said I'd made her final years so much happier. Elena laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Helen wrote me into her will, left me $10,000 for faithful service. I took that and another $275,000 besides. You're a serial killer. I'm a businesswoman, Elena corrected. I identified a market inefficiency and exploited it. Not my fault your generation is so desperate for companionship, you'll trust anyone who shows you basic kindness. Is that what you think you showed us? Kindness? I showed you exactly what you wanted to see. The caring cook, the warm confidant, the trustworthy helper. You people are so easy to manipulate. You're so lonely, so grateful for attention. You believe anything. Catherine stood up abruptly. We're done here. But I held up my hand. One more thing, Elena. She looked at me with those cold eyes. You were right about one thing. I was vulnerable. I was lonely. I was grieving. You took advantage of that. I leaned forward slightly. But you made one critical mistake. What? She asked, genuinely curious. You assumed that being vulnerable meant being stupid, that grief meant weakness, that age meant incompetence. You thought I was a pathetic old lady who'd never figure out what you'd done. Elena's smile faltered. But I did figure it out. And once I did, I didn't fall apart. I didn't panic. I strategized. I gathered evidence. I built an airtight case. I set a trap, and you walked right into it. And now you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison for murdering my husband and at least 3 other innocent people. The case isn't over yet, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is. You just confessed to everything in a recorded interview with your attorney present. You gave us details only the killer would know. You bragged about your efficiency. I stood up. I may be a grieving widow, but I'm also a woman who spent 40 years authenticating art, spotting deceptions, identifying forgeries that fooled experts. You underestimated me. That was your fatal mistake. I walked out of that room without looking back. Catherine caught up to me in the hallway. That was remarkable, Margaret. And you're right. She just handed us a confession that her attorney can't exclude because he was sitting right there. Good, I said, because I want her to understand exactly how she lost. Not to the police, not to the legal system, to the pathetic old lady she thought she could manipulate and murder. 3 months later, Elena Morales was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder, 7 counts of fraud, and conspiracy. Vincent Morales received the same. They were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, I sat in the courtroom surrounded by Sarah, James, Amy, and Dr. Chen. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, satisfied. Instead, I just felt tired and desperately sad that Thomas wasn't there to see justice done. Because justice isn't the same as having someone back. It never would be. But it was something. And after 26 months of grief and 6 months of calculated deception, something felt like enough to begin healing. The morning after the sentencing, I woke up in my house for the first time in months without the weight of fear crushing my chest. Elena and Vincent were in prison. Thomas's killers had been caught, convicted, and locked away for life. But the house felt different, empty in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. I walked through the rooms Thomas and I had restored together. The kitchen where Elena had cooked while planning my murder. The study where I'd found evidence of her crimes. The bedroom where I'd woken up to find my husband dead. Every space was contaminated by what had happened. Every corner held a memory I could no longer separate from the horror of knowing how Thomas really died. I couldn't stay here. Sarah flew in from California 3 days after the sentencing. She found me in the living room surrounded by boxes, systematically packing up 42 years of marriage. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said simply. "I'm selling the house." "But Mom, this is your home. Dad designed this house. You've lived here your entire married life. Your father was murdered in this house, Sarah. A woman who pretended to care about me cooked meals in that kitchen while planning to poison me. I can't heal here." Sarah sat down heavily on the sofa. "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere near the ocean, maybe. Somewhere that doesn't remind me of everything I lost." We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Sarah said quietly, "I'm sorry I wasn't here more. After Dad died, I should have visited more often. If I had, maybe you wouldn't have been so vulnerable to someone like Elena." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was carrying guilt that wasn't hers to carry. Sarah, Elena, and Vincent were professional killers. They studied their victims, identified vulnerabilities, exploited them with surgical precision. They would have found a way in regardless. This wasn't your fault. "But you were alone." I was grieving. "That's different than being helpless." I reached over and took her hand. "I caught them, sweetheart. A 68-year-old widow outsmarted 2 serial killers and brought them to justice. I'm stronger than any of us realized." Sarah squeezed my hand, tears running down her face. "You are. You're the strongest person I know." Over the next 3 months, I systematically dismantled the life Thomas and I had built. The house sold quickly, a young family, eager and hopeful, who had no idea what had happened there. I didn't tell them. It wasn't their burden to carry. I kept only what mattered: photos, a few pieces of furniture Thomas had designed, my mother's china, books we'd collected together. Everything else, all the things Elena had priced and cataloged for her garage sale of my life, I donated or sold. Dr. Chen helped me find a small cottage in Mystic, Connecticut, right by the ocean. It had 2 bedrooms, large windows that let in morning light, and a porch where I could sit and watch the water. It was nothing like the Victorian Thomas and I had restored. It was mine alone, untainted by memories I couldn't separate from grief and betrayal. Amy helped me move in. She set up my computer, arranged my books, hung pictures on the walls. When she finished, she found me standing on the porch watching the sunset over the water. "It's beautiful here, Grandma." "It is," I agreed. "It's peaceful. Are you going to be okay?" I considered the question honestly. I don't know, but I think for the first time in 2 years, I have a chance to find out. Amy hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you. What you did, catching them, building the case, facing them down, that took incredible courage. Or incredible anger," I said wryly. "Both, and both were valid." After Amy left, I sat alone in my new cottage and thought about everything that had happened. Thomas had been dead for 28 months. Elena and Vincent were in prison for the rest of their lives. 4 families had closure about what happened to their mothers, their wives, their loved ones. The pattern had been stopped, but I still woke up reaching for Thomas. I still heard his voice in quiet moments. I still felt the crushing weight of knowing that his last hours were filled with confusion and fear as poison shut down his heart. Justice hadn't brought him back. It had simply meant his killers wouldn't hurt anyone else. That night, I did something I hadn't done since the morning I found Thomas dead. I pulled out the photo album from our 40th anniversary trip to Ireland. We'd walked along the cliffs of Moher, stayed in tiny bed and breakfasts, laughed until we cried over terrible directions and missed turns. In the photos, Thomas looked healthy, happy, alive. His smile was genuine. His eyes were bright. He had no idea that in 18 months, someone would poison him so they could steal from his widow. I traced his face in the photo with my finger. "I got them, Thomas," I whispered. "I made sure they paid for what they did to you, to us, to all of us." The ocean outside my window was quiet, rhythmic, eternal. I sat with Thomas's photo for a long time, letting myself remember him as he was, not as the cold body I'd found, not as the victim of a calculated murder, but as the man I'd loved for 42 years, the man who deserved to grow old with me, who'd earned his retirement, his grandchildren, his sunset years. The man who was stolen from me by people who saw human lives as nothing more than opportunities for profit. 3 weeks after I moved into the cottage, Patricia Ashford's daughter contacted me. Her name was Jennifer, and she'd been devastated to learn her mother had been murdered. "Mrs. Carter, I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't caught them, if you hadn't built that case, we never would have known what really happened to Mom. We thought she'd died of natural causes. We mourned her, missed her, but we accepted it. Finding out she was murdered, it was horrible. But knowing why, knowing who, knowing they'll never hurt anyone else, that matters." We talked for over an hour. Jennifer told me about her mother, a vibrant woman who'd loved gardening and mystery novels, who'd volunteered at the library, who'd trusted Elena Morales completely. "She talked about Elena all the time," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "Said she was such a help, so kind. The week before Mom died, she told me Elena had made her life so much easier. She died thinking Elena was her friend. I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I'm so sorry that happened to her. To all of them. But you stopped it. You made sure it ended." Jennifer's voice was fierce through her tears. "You saved whoever would have been next. You gave us answers. You gave us justice. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Thank you so much." After we hung up, I sat on my porch and cried. Not just for Thomas, but for Patricia, for Helen, for all the victims whose trust had been weaponized against them, for the families left behind, wondering and grieving. Helen Bernstein's son called the next day, then the daughter of the New Haven victim I hadn't even known about. Each conversation was painful and cathartic. Each family was grateful and devastated in equal measure. I realized something in those conversations. What I'd done wasn't just about Thomas. It was about breaking a pattern of predation that had destroyed multiple families. It was about making sure that elderly widows weren't seen as easy marks, that vulnerability wasn't mistaken for stupidity, that grief didn't make someone disposable. One evening, about a month after I'd moved to Mystic, Dr. Chen drove out to visit. We sat on my porch drinking tea and watching the ocean as the sun set. "How are you really doing, Margaret?" he asked. "Honestly, I don't know. Some days I feel strong, like I've reclaimed my life. Other days I feel hollowed out, like everything that mattered is gone. That's grief," Dr. Chen said gently. "It doesn't follow a straight line. It's not something you get over. It's something you learn to carry." I keep thinking about that morning, when I woke up and Thomas was gone. If I'd known then what I know now, that he'd been murdered, that someone had poisoned him, would I have been able to handle it? "You handled it when you found out," Dr. Chen pointed out. "You didn't fall apart. You fought back. You won." "It doesn't feel like winning. Because justice isn't the same as having him back. It never will be." Dr. Chen set down his teacup. "But it's something. It's accountability. It's protection for everyone who might have come after you. That matters, Margaret. What you did matters enormously." I looked out at the ocean, watching the waves roll in with relentless consistency. I keep wondering if Thomas knew. In those last hours, when the poison was working through his system, when his heart started failing, did he understand something was wrong? Was he scared? Did he call for me and I didn't hear? Margaret, you can't torture yourself with those questions. You'll never know the answers, and imagining them will only cause more pain. But he died alone, Samuel. My husband died alone and terrified because 2 people wanted money. And they're in prison because of you, because you refused to be their next victim, because you were smarter, stronger, and more determined than they ever anticipated. Dr. Chen turned to face me. Thomas would be so proud of you. The woman who caught his killers, who made sure they'd never hurt anyone else. That's an incredible legacy. After Dr. Chen left, I stayed on the porch long into the night. The ocean was dark and vast, the stars brilliant overhead. I thought about Thomas, about Elena's cold confession, about the families I'd spoken with, about the cottage that was slowly becoming home. Justice wasn't the same as healing, but maybe it was a necessary step toward it. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in almost 2 years. I put on comfortable clothes, walked down to the beach, and sat in the sand watching the sunrise. The air smelled like salt and possibility. The water was cold when I dipped my toes in, shocking and alive. Thomas was gone. That would never change. But I was still here, still breathing, still fighting, still capable of finding beauty in a sunrise over the ocean. I'd spent 2 years drowning in grief, 6 months fighting for justice, and 3 months rebuilding a life I didn't recognize. But sitting on that beach, feeling the sun on my face and the wind in my hair, I realized something important. I was Margaret Carter. I was 68 years old. I'd lost my husband to murder, caught his killers, and survived the darkest period of my life. And I was going to keep surviving. Not just existing, but actually living. Because that's what Thomas would have wanted. That's what I owed to myself. That's what all the victims, the ones who didn't get to fight back, deserved from someone who did. The sun rose fully over the ocean, brilliant and warm. I sat in the sand and watched it, feeling the first fragile stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not for what was lost, but for what might still be possible. 6 months after the trial ended, I was sitting on my porch in Mystic watching the morning fog roll in from the ocean when my phone rang. It was Jessica Reynolds, the private investigator who'd helped me catch Elena and Vincent. "Margaret, I wanted to let you know. The state of Massachusetts just reopened another case. A woman in Boston, 71 years old, died 3 years before Patricia Ashford. Same pattern. Elena worked for her for 7 months. They're exhuming the body this week. 5 victims, possibly more. The pattern had gone back even further than we'd known. Will they be charged?" I asked. "They're already serving life without parole for 4 murders. Additional charges won't change their sentences, but it gives another family answers. Closure." Jessica paused. "You did that, Margaret. You gave all of them answers." After we hung up, I sat with that knowledge. 5 families who now knew their mothers, their wives, their loved ones hadn't died of natural causes. 5 families who had closure, however painful. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. I'd been living in the cottage for 6 months, and slowly, so slowly I barely noticed, it had become home. I joined a book club at the local library, started volunteering at an art gallery in town, using my decades of experience to help authenticate donations. Made friends with my neighbor, a retired teacher named Claire, who brought me homemade soup and didn't ask too many questions about my past. I still woke up some mornings reaching for Thomas, still heard his voice in quiet moments, still felt the crushing weight of knowing how he died. But I also felt other things now. The satisfaction of helping a young artist get their first gallery showing, the pleasure of discussing a good mystery novel with my book club, the simple joy of morning coffee on my porch, watching the ocean wake up with the sunrise. Dr. Chen visited once a month. We'd have dinner, talk about everything and nothing, sit in comfortable silence watching the water. He never pushed me to move on or let go. He understood that grief doesn't have an expiration date, that healing isn't linear, that some wounds leave permanent scars. "You seem different," he said during one visit, about 8 months after the trial. "Lighter, somehow." "I don't know if I'm lighter," I said thoughtfully, "but I'm learning to carry the weight differently. Thomas is gone. That will never stop hurting. But I'm still here, and I owe it to myself, and to him, to actually live." Amy visited regularly, usually staying for long weekends. She'd started dating someone, a sweet young man who worked in environmental science. Watching her fall in love reminded me of those early days with Thomas, the excitement, the hope, the belief that anything was possible. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" Amy said during one visit as we walked along the beach. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you regret it? Investigating Elena, setting the trap, going through the trial? Would it have been easier to just not know?" I thought about that question carefully. Easier? Maybe. I could have died in my sleep thinking Elena was a kind woman who'd helped me through my grief. I never would have known Thomas was murdered. Never would have endured the trial, the confrontations, the testimony. But I would have been their victim. One more easy mark in a long line of elderly women they exploited and killed, and they would have moved on to the next one, and the next one, until someone finally stopped them. I looked at Amy. I stopped them. That matters. It will always matter. Sarah called me every Sunday, just like she had after Thomas died. But now our conversations were different. We talked about her life, her kids, her work. She'd stopped treating me like fragile glass that might shatter at any moment. "Mom, I'm proud of you," she said during one call. What you went through, what you survived. I don't know if I could have done that. You would have, I told her. When someone you love is taken from you, when evil walks into your life, disguised as kindness, you find strength you didn't know you had. You do what needs to be done. One afternoon in early spring, almost a year after the trial, I was working at the gallery when a woman in her 30s approached me. She looked nervous, uncertain. Are you Margaret Carter? She asked. I am. Can I help you? My name is Rachel Ashford. I'm Patricia Ashford's granddaughter. I wanted to meet you, to thank you in person for what you did. We sat in the gallery's small cafe, and Rachel told me about her grandmother, about Sunday dinners and terrible jokes, about quilts Patricia made for every grandchild, about how devastated the family had been when she died. Finding out she was murdered, it broke something in us, Rachel said, tears running down her face. But finding out you caught them, that you made sure they'd never hurt anyone else, that helped us heal. My mother says you're a hero. I'm not a hero, I said gently. I'm just someone who refused to be a victim. That's what makes you a hero, Mrs. Carter. You fought back. You won. After Rachel left, I sat in the quiet gallery thinking about heroism, about victory, about what it means to survive. I wasn't a hero. I was a 69-year-old widow who'd been targeted by killers and chose to fight instead of die. But maybe that was enough. Maybe survival itself was a kind of victory. That evening, I did something I'd been avoiding for almost 3 years. I pulled out Thomas's old phone, the one I'd found in his nightstand, the one that had helped crack the case. I scrolled through his photos, his messages to me, his calendar entries. Dinner with Margaret, her favorite restaurant. Pick up flowers for Margaret. Anniversary trip. Surprise Margaret with that shawl she liked. Even in the mundane details of his daily life, I was there. We were intertwined, inseparable. 42 years of partnership, of love, of building a life together. Elena and Vincent had stolen Thomas from me. They'd taken those future years we were supposed to have together. They'd murdered him for money, treated his life as nothing more than an obstacle to their payday. But they hadn't destroyed what we'd had. They hadn't erased 42 years of love. They hadn't taken the memories, the joy, the foundation Thomas and I had built together. That was still mine. That would always be mine. I closed Thomas's phone and set it carefully in a drawer, not forgetting, but letting go just a little, carrying the memory without letting it crush me. The next morning, I woke up early and walked down to the beach. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The ocean was calm, peaceful, eternal. I stood at the water's edge and spoke to Thomas, the way I'd done so many times since moving to Mystic. I miss you. Every single day, I miss you. But I'm okay, Thomas. I'm actually okay. I caught them. I made sure they paid for what they did to you, to us, to all of us. And now I'm learning to live again. Not the life we planned, but a life, one that would make you proud. The waves rolled in, consistent and soothing. I stood there for a long time, feeling the sun warm my face, breathing in the salt air, letting myself just be. I was Margaret Carter. I was 69 years old. I'd lost my husband to murder, caught serial killers, survived a trial, and rebuilt my life from nothing. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, braver than I'd ever believed, more resilient than anyone, including myself, had known. And I was going to keep living. For Thomas, for the victims who didn't survive, for myself, because that's what it means to truly win. Not just seeking justice, but choosing to keep breathing, keep fighting, keep finding beauty in sunrises over the ocean, even when your heart is broken. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever lost someone you love to violence or deception, if you've ever felt like the world took everything from you, you're not alone. Your story matters. Your survival matters. Share your experience in the comments if you feel comfortable. And if this story helped you in any way, please like and subscribe. You never know who needs to hear that it's possible to survive the unsurvivable, to find strength in the darkest moments, to rebuild a life after it's been shattered. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here with me. And remember, being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak. Being kind doesn't mean being foolish. And being a survivor means you've already won the most important battle of all. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.